I had always felt a sense of pride in my work, a deep-rooted connection to the systems I managed. My fingers danced across the keyboard, entering commands with a precision that came from years of dedication. There was an unspoken bond between me and the root access key. It was the core of my existence in the company. That day, however, the atmosphere shifted. HR had summoned me with an air of finality that set my heart racing. As I approached the office, I felt a cold sweat forming on my brow. I had heard whispers about HR's growing discontent with my decisions, but I brushed them aside, believing my expertise would shield me from such scrutiny. When I entered the dimly lit room, I was greeted not by the usual warm smiles, but by HR's calculating gaze, cold and unforgiving. "We need to talk about your recent accesses," they said, their voice devoid of empathy. The air thickened with tension as they continued. "It's time to revoke your badge. You've crossed too many lines." My stomach dropped. The root access key had always been my lifeline. Without it, I was nothing. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, each beat a reminder of the power I was about to lose. As they continued to speak, I struggled to process the implications of their words. I had always been the one in control, the one who held the keys to the kingdom. Now I was being stripped of my identity, my worth measured by my access. I felt anger bubbling within me, a fierce fire igniting as the realization settled in. This was more than just a job, it was my life's work, and it was being dismantled before my eyes. The thought of losing everything I had built was unbearable. I left the HR office with my heart heavy and my mind racing. The revocation had sent shockwaves through my very being. I was an outsider now, a ghost in a once familiar space. The executives would notice my absence, but would they care? Or would they simply see it as one less obstacle in their path? I had to make them understand the consequences of their actions, to show them the power I once wielded and how they had underestimated me. As I sat in my office, staring at the now meaningless badge that had been the symbol of my authority, I felt the anger morph into something darker. I would not let this stand. I would find a way to reclaim my position, my access, and my identity. The game was just beginning, and I was ready to play. Amidst the chaos, I could feel the tension in the air. It was thick and palpable. I had never felt so alone, yet so determined. My mind raced with possibilities, and I knew I had to act quickly. The executives were oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface, but soon enough they would learn that revoking my badge was just the beginning of their troubles. I was going to make them regret their decision, and I would do it from the shadows where the real power lay. My journey was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. With each passing moment, the weight of the root access key loomed larger in my mind. It had been my ticket to power, granting me privileges that others could only dream of. I had managed the network, orchestrated updates, and ensured the integrity of our systems. Now, without it, I was rendered impotent. The executives surely believed they had silenced me, but they would soon discover that I was far from defeated. I leaned back in my chair, the sterile office around me feeling more like a prison than a sanctuary. The glow of my computer screen reflected my thoughts, swirling in a storm of resentment and determination. I could picture the executives, gathered in their plush offices, sipping coffee and discussing their latest moves. They thought they had rid themselves of a problem, but they had merely set the stage for their downfall. I had access to every log, every encrypted file that flowed through the company's veins. My fingers twitched with the desire to dive back in, to reclaim my throne from the shadows. The key may have been physically revoked, but the knowledge I held was an indelible part of me. I could still navigate the digital labyrinth, and I would find a way to turn the tide. As I plotted my course of action, I recalled the vulnerabilities I had discovered over the years. I knew the systems better than anyone, and I had created backdoors that were still intact. I had never intended for these to be used maliciously, but now they served a greater purpose. The executives would soon realize that their actions had consequences far beyond their understanding. The tension in the air was electric as I began to piece together my plan. I would gather information, document their missteps, and expose their incompetence. Each byte of data I collected would become a weapon in my arsenal. I envisioned their faces when the truth came crashing down around them, the disbelief transforming into panic. I spent the next few days in a calculated haze, working late into the night, shrouded in the comforting darkness of my office. My heart raced with a mixture of fear and excitement as I executed my plan. I was not alone in this. I had allies, those who had also felt the sting of HR's decisions, and they were eager to join me in this rebellion against the tyranny that had taken hold of our company. Every keystroke brought me closer to my goal, and with each passing day, I felt the power of my knowledge surging back. I would no longer be the passive player in this game. I would become the architect of their undoing. The executives would soon learn that in this world, knowledge was power, and I was about to unleash a storm that would shake the very foundations of our organization. As I prepared for the final act of my plan, I could envision the chaos that would ensue. The executives, once so confident in their decision to revoke my access, would find themselves scrambling to contain the fallout. They had underestimated me, and in doing so, they had sealed their fate. The root access key might have been taken from me, but I was ready to wield my true power in a way they could never have predicted. The game was on, and I was determined to emerge victorious, no matter the cost. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation as I delved deeper into my plan. Each passing hour in my office felt like a symphony of quiet rebellion, where every keystroke was a note in a melody of revenge. I was no longer just a disgraced employee. I was a strategist, gathering intelligence, preparing for the inevitable confrontation that would shake the executives to their core. I had allies, former colleagues who had felt the weight of HR's heavy hand and were now more than willing to join me in this fight. They were disgruntled, motivated by their own grievances, and I knew together we could orchestrate a symphony of chaos that would bring the company to its knees. Their faces were lit by the glow of their screens, each of us operating under the cover of night, the thrill of our subversion mixing with a sense of camaraderie. Every document I retrieved, every piece of information I unearthed, was a strike against the executives who believed they had silenced me. The deeper I dug, the more I realized the tangled web of incompetence and oversight that had become the hallmark of our leadership. I took meticulous notes, cataloging their missteps, their ethical breaches, and the very real consequences of their actions. The more I collected, the clearer my vision became. It was almost poetic. They had thrown me into the abyss, believing I would crumble under the weight of their decision. Instead, they had ignited a fire within me. I would expose their failures, but not in a way they expected. I wouldn't confront them openly. They would never see me coming. I would be the ghost in the machine, the silent observer, and when the time was right, I would unleash the evidence of their incompetence, and it would be devastating. The executives in their plush offices adorned with accolades and awards were oblivious to the storm brewing. I could almost picture them, laughing and congratulating themselves on their latest triumphs, unaware of the turmoil that was about to erupt. They were so focused on their trivial pursuits that they had lost sight of the very foundation that supported their power, the people who actually ran the systems, the ones they had underestimated. I envisioned the moment when I would lay bare the truth, how their expressions would shift from smug confidence to disbelief and then to sheer panic. As I pieced together the final parts of my plan, I felt a thrill run through me. I was no longer a mere player. I was the mastermind, orchestrating every move with precision and intent. In the following weeks, I spent every moment refining my strategy. With the help of my allies, we crafted a digital dossier that documented the executives' failures in a way that was irrefutable. Each page was a testament to their negligence, a chronicle of their misdeeds that would soon be revealed to the world. The executives had sown the seeds of their own destruction, and I was merely the harbinger of their reckoning. As the days turned into weeks, I felt the tension in the air grow. I was like a coiled spring, ready to unleash my vengeance when the moment was right. I had learned to be patient, a virtue that had served me well in my years at the company. The executives, in their arrogance, believed they had won, but little did they know that I was merely waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. Then, the day arrived when I felt the time was right. I gathered my allies, and together we sat in the dim light of my office, the atmosphere charged with a mix of excitement and apprehension. I shared my vision for the unveiling, and their eyes lit up with anticipation. We were ready to unleash the storm, to expose the truths that had been buried beneath layers of deceit and ignorance. It would not just be an act of revenge, it would be a reckoning. As we prepared to go public with the evidence, I sensed a shift in the dynamics of power within the company. The executives had underestimated the depth of my knowledge, and now they were about to face the consequences of their actions. In the ensuing chaos, I could almost hear the echoes of their disbelief as the truth began to unravel. They had thought they could silence me, but in doing so, they had only fueled my resolve. The executives would soon learn that the real power did not rest in their titles or their wealth, but in the knowledge and the people they had chosen to disregard. As I prepared to press the send button, a wave of satisfaction washed over me. I had reclaimed my identity, my power, and I was ready to watch the fallout of their decisions. The executives had awoken the beast, and now it was time for them to pay the price. The storm was coming, and I was at its center, ready to unleash my fury upon those who had wronged me. With one click, I would set into motion the series of events that would change the course of the company forever. The moment had arrived, and I could not have felt more alive. This was my moment of reckoning, and I was ready to embrace it. As the files began to disseminate, I leaned back in my chair, a sense of calm washing over me. The executives would soon realize that their actions had consequences, and I would be there to witness their downfall. The game was no longer about survival, it was about justice, and I was determined to see it through. The moment the files disseminated across the company's network, an unsettling wave of chaos washed over the executives. They were oblivious to the storm brewing, confident in their ivory towers, but now they were about to be thrust into a whirlwind of panic. I could almost hear the collective gasp as the revelations I had meticulously gathered came to light, each piece of evidence a dagger aimed at their arrogance. As the first reports of the breaches began to circulate, I leaned back in my chair, savoring the moment. The executives had prided themselves on their oversight, but they had failed to see the cracks forming beneath their feet. I imagined them huddled in their conference room, brows furrowed in disbelief as they processed the unfolding disaster. The chaos I had orchestrated was unfurling beautifully, and I was at the heart of it. I knew the executives would initially dismiss the information as a mere glitch or a simple oversight, but soon they would realize the gravity of the situation. My fingers danced over the keyboard as I monitored the frantic messages flying through the company's communication channels. Executives, once so sure of themselves, were now scrambling to contain the fallout. Their disbelief was palpable, their confidence shattered with every new revelation that emerged. I imagined HR's face when they learned of the cascading failures, the mounting evidence of the negligence they had allowed to fester. They had thought they could silence me, but now they were witnessing the consequences of their actions. Each accusation, every breach of protocol, was a direct indictment of their leadership. The very foundation they had built their careers upon was crumbling, and it was all thanks to their underestimation of me. In the days that followed, the chaos escalated. Executives were called into emergency meetings, their voices raised in panic as they tried to piece together the extent of the damage. I could picture them, once so self-assured, now reduced to frantic strategists desperately attempting to spin the narrative in their favor. Their disbelief turned to anger as they sought scapegoats, but little did they know that the evidence I had collected was irrefutable. They could not sweep this under the rug. With each passing hour, more employees joined the chorus of discontent. They had witnessed the incompetence of the executives firsthand, and now they felt emboldened to speak out. I had ignited a spark of rebellion among my former colleagues, and the executives were powerless to stop it. The whispers of dissent turned into a roar, and the company's once unbreakable facade began to crack. As the executives scrambled to regain control, I reveled in their downfall from the shadows. I had transformed from a dismissed employee to a specter haunting their every move. Their disbelief was a source of exhilaration for me. They had thought they could erase me, but I had returned with a vengeance they never saw coming. The power dynamic had shifted, and I was at the center of it all. During one particularly tense meeting, I imagined the executives facing the board, their faces pale as they detailed the breaches and the fallout. I pictured them struggling to justify their decisions, their credibility eroding with every passing moment. They had spent years building their empires on the backs of those like me, and now they were facing the consequences of their hubris. The chaos I had unleashed was a reckoning, and I was determined to watch it unfold. The headlines began to change, the narrative shifting from one of success to one of scandal. News outlets picked up the story, and suddenly the company was thrust into the spotlight for all the wrong reasons. I felt a sense of satisfaction swell within me. This was more than just revenge, it was justice. I had turned the tables, and the executives were now the ones on trial. As the days turned into weeks, the executives were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered reputations. I continued to gather more evidence, documenting their mismanagement as they floundered in the public eye. Each misstep they made only added fuel to the fire, and I knew I had them exactly where I wanted them. The executives had underestimated my resolve, and now they were paying the price. Finally, the day came when their facade crumbled completely. News broke of impending investigations, regulatory scrutiny, and internal audits that would expose the depths of their failures. I knew that this was just the beginning. The executives would be forced to answer for their actions, and I would be watching from the edge of the shadows, my heart racing with anticipation. The chaos that had erupted within the company was a symphony to my ears, each note echoing the triumph of my plan. I had orchestrated this downfall with precision, and now I was ready to witness the executives' disbelief turn to despair. They had thought they could silence me, but instead they had awakened a force they could not contain. I was the architect of their undoing, and the storm was far from over. As I sat in my office, the glow of the screen reflecting my satisfaction, I knew that I had reclaimed my power. The executives had underestimated me, and in doing so, they had set a chain of events into motion that would forever change the landscape of the company. I was ready to embrace the chaos I had unleashed, and I would not rest until justice was served. The game was no longer about survival, it was about victory, and I was determined to see it through to the end. As the dust began to settle from the chaos I had unleashed, I sat quietly in my office, a sense of calm washing over me. The executives were no longer the untouchable figures they once were. They were scrambling to save face as the fallout from their negligence spread like wildfire. I had watched their disbelief morph into panic, their confidence shattered as they faced the consequences of their actions. I had meticulously crafted this moment, and now it was finally unfolding before my eyes. Reports of investigations and regulatory scrutiny flooded the news, and the company's reputation, once gleaming, was now tarnished. I could almost hear the collective gasp of disbelief from the executives as they realized the extent of their failures, a symphony of chaos that I had orchestrated with precision. They had cast me aside, believing I was powerless, but they had ignited a fire within me that they could never have anticipated. Days turned into weeks, and the executives were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered empire. I watched as they desperately sought to regain control, their voices raised in meetings filled with anger and frustration. They had spent years building their careers on the backs of employees like me, and now they were facing the consequences of their hubris. I relished every moment of their struggle, knowing that I had become the architect of their undoing. I gathered my allies, those who had felt the sting of HR's heavy hand, and we celebrated our small victories. The whispers of dissent had turned into a roar, and the executives were powerless to stop it. We had ignited a spark of rebellion among our former colleagues, and the truth was finally coming to light. Each new revelation served as a reminder of their incompetence, a testament to the power of knowledge we had collectively wielded. As I continued to monitor the chaos, I felt a sense of satisfaction swell within me. This was more than just revenge, it was justice. The executives had underestimated my resolve, and now they were paying the price. I was no longer an outsider, but a force to be reckoned with, and I had ensured that the truth would not be buried under their arrogance. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. When the news broke of impending investigations, I felt a rush of exhilaration. The executives had thought they could silence me, but instead, they had awakened a force they could not contain. As the headlines shifted from tales of success to scandal, I reveled in the knowledge that I had played a pivotal role in their downfall. I sat in my office, watching the world outside my window. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the city, and I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I had reclaimed my identity, my power, and I was ready to embrace the chaos I had unleashed. The executives had thought they could erase me, but in doing so, they had transformed me into something far greater, a harbinger of their reckoning. With the storm still raging, I drafted my final thoughts on the events that had transpired. I had learned that true power lay not in the titles we held or the offices we occupied, but in the knowledge we possessed and the courage to wield it. The executives may have held the keys to the company, but I had the keys to the truth, and that made all the difference. As I reflected on my journey, I felt a sense of closure wash over me. I had fought back against the forces that had sought to silence me, and I had emerged victorious. The executives would be forced to reckon with their failures, and I would be there to witness it all unfold.